On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Dean Sapp. He is the VP of Information Security at Filevine. We're going to be talking about ransomware. It's always in the news, and there's multiple facets to this, from prevention to preparation to response. We're going to talk about highly sensitive data sectors and what a smaller business can do, because obviously you might not have someone in that role, and maybe there's some things you could do in advance to prevent the ransom from having to happen. Dean, thanks for being on the show. Thanks for joining.
Happy to be here.
Awesome. Let's start off with two things before we dive in. Tell us what Filevine does, and then VP of Information Security, what falls in your plate?
Sure. Happy to talk a little bit about that. So if you think about what Salesforce is to salesmen and women, Filevine is to the legal profession. So we have document management, case management, lead generation, intake, and a contract management lifecycle products. So we have a full suite of business products tailor-made for the legal industry. And so really that's the analogy I share. In my role as Vice President of Information Security, I handle multiple teams. So we handle all of the customer-facing questions about information security. We do incident response for clients that don't have an incident response company on retainer to kind of guide them through some of the challenges that they face if they are hit by ransomware. And of course, we verify that none of their files have been impacted in our platform. And my team also helps with compliance and privacy, just making sure that we are complying with the law and that we are, secure to the best of our ability and stopping the bad guys on a daily basis. And, we have about 3,000 law firms that are running the platform. And so we are a data aggregator in some sense of the word. And so our intent is to really make sure that we're stopping the bad actors, before they can make any progress.
Awesome. Well, this is I guess it's always in the news, ransomware, and everyone hears it. It's always talked about. There's it's like a shark attack. When it happens, it gets the coverage because it's the oh my God, it could happen to me moment. And we don't know, right? We don't know about when it's going to hit. A lot of facets to it. But before we even dive into that, I just want to make sure, I think everyone listening to the podcast should know what ransomware is. What are there any things that ransomware isn't that we maybe mistake for ransomware before we start, just out of curiosity?
There probably are some denial of service type attacks that we see where, they're essentially trying to lock down our assets, our technology stack, our web servers and things like that, and take them offline. And so in some cases, there are threats to use some of the bot herding networks to, and customers that I've talked to have received. I mean, it's still type like a ransom, because they're saying, look, if you don't pay us, we're going to shut your website off for 3 days and you're going to lose, whatever business per day. But I would say that ransomware is largely tied to, it is like a denial of service attack. It's locking down laptops, servers, web services, anything that they can do that the bad guys can monetize and get you to pay them money, and preferably in Bitcoin.
In Bitcoin, there you go. Okay, well. That does make sense. That's what it typically sounds like when you hear about it in the news. I guess let's up to the top. We're going to go through. We're going to talk about preparation, prevention, preparation, response. Right. So let's start at the beginning of this when we're looking at, hey, we just should try to avoid this. The prevention component. How much of this is system? How much is it pure human, or is it a mixture of both when it comes to prevention?
When I think of prevention, I think about the entire business, right? So I encourage a lot of clients, and I've spoken on ransomware probably a dozen times, and how important it is to actually have a plan because it's so common. The Verizon data breach report just came out a little while ago. It's been the 15th year. And for like the last 5 years, ransomware has been one of the most common attack vectors, and it actually went up 13% last year. So the 2022 Verizon data breach report is from what happened in 2021, and it showed a 13% increase in attacks that were successful. And these were attacks or breaches that were reported. We don't even know about the attacks that were not reported. So it's happening very frequently, and businesses need to be aware of it. And I encourage them to go out and get a cyber liability, cyber breach policy from their insurance carrier, because the insurance companies are really good at sending out questionnaires that say, what are the things that need to happen to stop a breach, to stop a ransomware event? So just by engaging in your insurance carrier, you essentially get a free risk assessment of what you need to do to protect the business. So, and then of course, many of the insurance policies, they'll have an incident response company on retainer. So instead of me having to spend $20,000, $30,000 to have Mandiant on retainer or some other expert that handles incident response, by going through my insurance carrier, I'm able to get that protection built in. And of course, having legal counsel so that if you do have a breach type event, your internal legal counsel can talk to external, can keep everything under privilege while you figure out what's really happened. So there's a lot of things that I encourage businesses to do. But when we talk about, proactively, it largely comes, these attacks largely come through email. So we can talk all day about different precautions, but the human element is very real. And knowing that the threats are going to come through your email system predominantly, 90 plus % of the time. I don't have that exact stat, but I know it's the vast majority. It comes through email. And then there's a small portion of it where somebody is, found a USB in the parking lot, or your public website was vulnerable, and then the bad guys hack the website, and you're on the same network, and then they get in internally. But yeah.
So yeah, I mean, that's actually, two things there. It's really interesting. One is, and I think this is, especially if you're a smaller company, you can't spend the, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 that you mentioned to have this done, is look at that cyber breach policy from your insurance carrier. I mean, it sounds like a good, at least, hey, let me figure out, if I'm insurable and what the risk factors are before, before it gets too late. And then when it comes to the human element, everyone always sees don't click links in email, but yet it happens. I guess what can we do? What more can be done in terms of educating people in the company to go, hey, listen, if you see a link, don't assume. Is it assumption? Is it just, the emails are becoming more compelling that people just want to click? I mean, what can be done? Can anything be done?
Sure. Yeah, and you're right. The actor, if we think about hackers, they are really, really good at understanding ROI. They want to spend the least amount of money to get the most amount of money out of their victims, right? So the emails are getting sophisticated. The English and the language of the attacker that they're targeting someone else is getting more proficient. They're getting better. And of course, the ransomware kits that are available, for $300-$400, you can start your own ransomware business. And they typically come with 24/7 support with Chinese, Russian, German, and English support. So it's pretty crazy, the kind of ransomware as a business kind of offering that's being made out there. But that's probably part of the problem with the proliferation of ransomware. And at the same time, there are very simple things that can be done to protect the company. I tell everybody, and this is nothing new, but you should be running some type of next generation endpoint protection on your laptops. Microsoft has a really good product. The Defender 365 for the money is a really good product, right? And then there are the CrowdStrikes of the world, and the Sentinel ones, and the BlackBerry Silence products that are quite good. So you can get a pretty decent security product to protect you for not a lot of money. But you typically would need like an IT expert or even the VAR that you buy it from to help you get it configured and running and just make sure it's up to date. So, but on the email side, there really is a tremendous amount you can do by just deciding that you're going to digitally sign the emails within your company and then digitally sign the emails with your legitimate customers, right? It's all of the illegitimate email, all the spam or the targeted fish or the whaling attacks that go after your executives. Those are typically from a spoofed domain. So by either having an email firewall that can look at it, so think Proofpoint, Mimecast, any number of Barracuda, any number of products that can do email firewalling, but just by signing legitimate emails within your Exchange environment or your Google environment, you can reduce the number of attack emails that actually hit user inboxes dramatically.
That's some great advice. And as you're kind of going through this process, so this is prevention. Sounds like a lot of preparation in terms of putting the right vendor products in place. You mentioned digital endpoint, digitally sign your emails. Doesn't sound like this could be a small company, big company. It sounds like there are different solutions for different budgets.
Right.
In terms of preparation, I guess maybe the component of that maybe you could touch on is when it does happen. Let's say there is a ransomware. Obviously, you have to have a response. But you almost have to have a kind of maybe a fire drill of who do we go to? What do we do? And then obviously you need to have a response, in terms of solution. But it sounds like, you need to have some kind of a walkthrough mentally, or at least, document it as to, hey, if this is going to happen in the company, what's the first phone call?
Sure. No, that's a great question. And that is really, depending on the size of the company that we're talking about, many companies go through SOC audits, SOC 2, Type 1, Type 2 information security audits. And as part of those audits, they would need to show that they have an incident response plan, right? And so that's a document that says, when something really bad happens, what are we going to do? And it typically is made up of a couple of experts. So general counsel, perhaps your CEO or a delegate, your IT lead and the delegate, and then your practice area, whoever's really running the business in a law firm, that may be the managing partner, managing shareholder, someone of that nature. And so knowing that you have this group of senior decision makers, and then they are privy to the attacks or the events that occur. I mean, you don't want to raise that, emergency response. You don't want to ring that bell unless you're really having a problem. And then you just need to let them know. And typically my advice to clients is your first call is either to your insurance carrier, if they have the incident response on retainer, and if they already have legal counsel on retainer, or it's to your external legal counsel. So you will talk to your GC, your general counsel inside the company. They will talk to an external legal counsel, and they'll set up that protected client attorney communication channel, and all information about the incident that you're investigating. It's tied back to your emergency response team and your external legal counsel, and then they decide at what point do we need to go bring in law enforcement, either local or if it's a big international case or something, the FBI or other Interpol, other legal entities that may need to be involved, because at some point, depending on if the breach was successful, you're going to have to start notifying impacted customers and consumers, right? And so, but you want to be really thoughtful about how you do this. You want to gather all the facts. You want to make sure you understand the scope of the incident. I mean, because I've reviewed many incident response issues where they thought there was a small incursion, they made a claim, and then they had to come back a week later and revise it. Well, actually, instead of it being 1,000 customers, it was 400,000 customers. And then they come back a week later. Actually, they got everything. Oh. You really want to make sure you get your facts straight, because you don't want to mislead people and believe, oh, we're not impacted at all, when in fact they were. So there's a lot to untangle there. But really having the right plan in place, and then even just having a tabletop, just thinking about it, maybe annually or every 2 years, have a tabletop, talk about what's the likelihood of this is happening, which is super high, and then do we have any mitigations? Are we going to be able to weather this storm? and understanding technically and legally what the plan is goes a long way.
Interesting. Great advice. And, I guess we work with a lot of startups, and a lot of them at some point want to go get, SOC 2 compliance, because obviously they want to work with different vendors. That's typically when they, make the decision to invest there. And I was just thinking, as you're talking, obviously that compliance helps cover some of the preparation for ransomware. Sounds like it would be even helpful if it's something that's on the roadmap for a company, knowing that this, is growing ransomware. Maybe start earlier. It seems like it gets a lot of the components in play, gets a lot of the ducks in a row, and all of a sudden now, when you do come to that point where you want it for your business to grow and you want that enterprise client, it's already there. But also, the sooner it goes into play, it might just help you from just being more secure.
That's exactly right. The most important thing that the information security officer or VP can do for a company is to mitigate profit volatility. And profit volatility comes from a large cyber breach or a large financial fraud or something that impacts the company in a material way. I mean, we're thinking $100 million loss or a $500 million loss that we saw in the news a couple of weeks ago from a company that was breached. I won't name them just because it's, all you have to do is Google it. But a $500 million breach is a lot of profit volatility. And that can impact your shares and your stock value, and of course your reputation as a company. So you're exactly right. The sooner you get involved in understanding the biggest risks to the business, because business email compromise is the number one, but the losses are often small. That might be, $500,000 or less. Usually they're $30,000 to $60,000 for an email fraud, wire fraud kind of breach. But I've actually worked on cases where it was $1 million dream home, or some very expensive equipment where the wire information was changed at the last minute because the hackers were in the email accounts of the business, and they simply spoofed the emails and then created new folders and automatically sent responses where they wouldn't be seen by a employee. So understanding that, if you're trying to manage profit volatility, you're trying to manage the reputation of the company, the sooner you get ahead of it, the better. Right. I know that Tenable created a research report a few years ago that said, the cost of preventing a breach was a small fraction of the cost of actually responding or having to manage the breach, right? So, it's that penny pound analogy that you've heard of for years. Really, prevention when it comes to business email compromise and ransomware is worth every penny you put into it.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. And sometimes, if you're most organizations, if it's not broken, you don't typically fix it, and you're running 1,000,000 miles an hour. It's not until all of a sudden, oh darn, I need it. There's tons of analogies we can use from day to day life. You mentioned something about double impact when it comes to response. So you have your response plan in place. You're out there. You mentioned get your facts straight before you go public. I think that makes a lot of sense. And then there's something that you mentioned called double impact. What is that?
Well, the attackers, as I mentioned, are smart. If they get into your network and they ransom your systems, they found at least one method to get into the systems. But once they're in the systems behind the firewall, they might discover other methods to get into the network. And so when you're doing your incident response, you have to understand that they may have found multiple ways to come back. And if you are going to pay, and of course the FBI says don't pay, make sure you have good backups, make sure you've tested your backups and you can restore your information so you can keep your business running. But in the event that the bad guys have found all of the backups, they've encrypted them as well, and your only recourse is to pay, then you just need to be very cognizant that they may have found another way into the network. So even though you've detected one primary vector, there may be others. And so I've actually worked with clients, unfortunately, that they paid the ransom, they recovered their files, and then it was just a few weeks later, the ransom actors came back in through another door that they had discovered and ransomed their files again. And so they ended up having to pay twice a very significant amount of money because they didn't secure their environment, or they assumed that the only way in was the way that they discovered the incident from, right? But there's also another factor to this double whammy, and that is that the ransomware events that have been occurring the last few years, early on, the NotPetya's and some of the other variants of the ransomware, we just started to discover that they were encrypting the files, but then they were also starting to make an offline backup. And so what we've seen more recently in most of the different malware types is that they are in fact backing up your data to another cloud, and then in many cases making it indexed and searchable so that they can then charge other hackers to search your data to target other people, as well as to say, look, not only do you have to pay to get your access to your files back, you also have to pay us so we don't publish it to the world, or sell it as a new service for targeting, your CEO and your C-suite. So it's almost like a triple whammy with the type of attacks and the methods that the ransomware actors want. They ultimately just want to get paid, and they want to get paid as much as they can get paid.
Absolutely. I guess let me ask you this. Let's say I'm listening to this and go, hey, you know what? Everything is, on the cloud. I use, various vendors. They've got it covered. What do I have to worry about? Like, if you're a small business, medium-sized business, I mean, is that true? Is that being naive, or it's like, hey, that's their problem, they're dealing with it? Or what happens when you don't actually store anything locally?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I can tell you that I've never audited a cloud environment where they didn't have some misconfiguration, they didn't have some password that was 2 years old and 3 developers ago that was in code, right? And they have their secrets in code, and then and then they make their GitHub repository or their GitLab repository public by mistake. The bad guys see the source code, they pull the secret out, they try it, and they're like, "Oh, we're in." Yep. Fantastic. So, clouds can be, I have a good friend, Phil Kemp, who's a security expert. He, about 10 years ago, he said, it's starting to get cloud-delicious, right? We love the cloud. Our appetite for cloud services is growing dramatically. And I believe the cloud can be extremely secure. But I also believe that the cloud can be insecure. And many of the cloud providers, when you go to sign up, they don't necessarily turn everything on by default. So you have to change your buckets from public to private. You have to change your blob storage to private. You have to go through and ultimately, like for Amazon, you do a well-architected review. They'll come in and they'll assess the security posture of your cloud environment and help guide you through the process of securing it. Because Amazon, Google, Heroku, AWS, or GCP, they don't want you to get breached in their cloud, right? So they are incentivized, but only at a certain level, right? If you're spending $500 a month, they probably aren't going to be able to help you. But if you're spending $5 million a month, sure, they're gonna. You're a high priority client, and they want to help. So clouds can be really, really secure, and they can be really insecure.
Awesome. I think tons of advice there, and I think that's a really good point. That even if it's on somebody else's infrastructure, you're still responsible. I think that's a great way to summarize that. Dean, I was going to say thanks for being on. Thanks for sharing. I think you provide a lot of good insights in terms of the prevention, preparation, response aspects for ransomware. If somebody does want to reach out to you to talk about any of these topics, pick your brain, or have a question, what's a good way to get a hold of you?
Sure. I'm happy to answer questions. So you can hit me up on my email, deansapp@filevine.com. Happy to respond there, as well as my personal email, deansapp@hotmail. So I've had that account for like 30 years, but they're welcome to reach me anytime. And or we also have several social media pages for Filevine. They have security questions. They can tag me on those pages, and we'll be happy to help.
Awesome. Thanks for being on. Thanks for sharing. I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. Take care, Amir, and all your followers.
Absolutely. That's it for this episode. We back in different guests, different topic. Hopefully you found that useful. I'm sure everyone knows what ransomware is, but I think Dean covered a lot of great tips in terms of if you're small, medium, or even big business and what you should be looking at. If you did find it useful, share it with somebody else. That's how the podcast grows. And if you do have any questions, please hit Dean up. He's a great expert in this field. And then if he doesn't know the answer, I'm sure he'll find someone who can help you. Otherwise, until next time, thank you and goodbye.